Welcome back to the Flying with the Flock podcast, the easiest place to get all your Eagles and other NFL related news. I'm your host, Matt, and welcome to episode 6 of the podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Finally, we're back on schedule. This should be coming out the day that I'm recording this, that being October 23rd, which is a Wednesday. But yeah, I'm glad to be back again. Hopefully, we can continue this momentum going forward as long as I get no more tech issues. I apologize for the echoey mic. Last week, it was the first episode that I was using the mic, so I just had to test out certain things. But hopefully, this episode goes better, especially with mic quality. So, with all that being said and out of the way, I just wanted to say please like and subscribe and follow our Twitter before we jump into this episode. It would be really appreciated in order to see your guys' support. I'm going to continue this no matter how much support I get, but I figured I'd just ask for it at the beginning instead of the end just to see maybe if some numbers go up. But with all that out of the way and all the begging on my knees out of the way, let's get into the episode. This is going to be a very happy episode for me and other Eagles fans because this past weekend we had Eagles Giants, and although the passing offense wasn't amazing, uh, it wasn't horrible either. The Eagles waffle stomp the Giants at MetLife, 28-3. Uh, Falcons fans, I would close your ears for that one. Yeah. Jalen Hurts, kind of a okay day. Went 10 for 14, 114 yards and a touchdown in the air and 2 on the ground off the brotherly shove twice. Not amazing. He didn't turn over the ball at all, which definitely helped, which allowed for the run game, which I'll get into in a second. That's the bigger part of this game that we're going to be touching on. But yeah, Jalen Hurts just played solid. He only threw 14 times, but to beat the Giants, we only had to throw 14 times, which is promising. We don't have to win through the air. We have two top tier wide receivers, one in A.J. Brown and one in DeVonta Smith. Which, looking at receiving, our leading receiver was A.J. Brown with 5 receptions for 89 yards and a touchdown. DeVonta Smith had 1 reception for -2 yards. He's been a little bit quiet ever since coming back out of the bye week compared to A.J. Brown, who obviously exploded last week and continues to get targets from Jalen Hurts. There was a couple good deep balls that Jalen Hurts threw and A.J. Brown caught, especially the last pass there, which sort of sealed the game. Where A.J. Brown caught it just barely, but he was able to haul it in, and it looked really clean. There was another deep pass where the corner was on A.J. Brown for most of his down the field route, but eventually A.J. Brown just made enough separation and allowed for Jalen Hurts to wind up and make the pass, even with pressure in his face. Really that looked really promising. That Jalen Hurts, although did take quite a few sacks, which we'll talk about when we get to the Giants defense, was really impressive that he was able to handle the pressure that the Giants dialed up on him and was able to hit his receivers in stride even though he had somebody in his face. Uh, let's see. Other than that, most of the other receivers were quite quiet. We didn't pass as much as we have in the past. So, yeah, obviously the rest of the receivers are going to be quiet. I will say Paris Campbell, we did release him. Now, whether we're going to sign him back to the practice squad, that's another story to be told. He has to clear waivers, I believe, if we're going to sign him back on the practice squad. But we're starting to change up our lineup a little bit to fit new injuries and new needs that we have. Looking at the rushing offense, which was the big highlight, it was a Saquon Barkley Well, he doesn't even want to call it a revenge game. He refused to ever call it a revenge game because the Giants gave him his first chance. Saquon had 17 carries for 176 yards and a touchdown. I believe he was only like 3 or 4 yards away from breaking his all-time single game rushing record, and I'm pretty sure he broke MetLife's single game rushing record, which is kind of funny because he wasn't able to do that anytime that he was with the Giants there. But his first game back as an Eagle, he's able to go up there and run all over this Giants defense. And it wasn't like the Giants defense played bad in the rushing in their rushing D. They just weren't able to handle Saquon and this Eagles offensive line, which really opened up holes for him in the second quarter. First quarter was really quiet for both teams, but once we entered that second quarter, things just got going, and Saquon Barkley exploded. Kenneth Gainwell also had 13 carries for 56 yards. He looked fairly impressive as well. I'm feeling as we go on, it's definitely going to be more Kenny Gainwell taking pressure off of Saquon if we're in a if we have a large lead like this. I believe most of Kenneth Gainwell's touches came in the late third, early fourth quarter, and then once we pulled all the starters, Will Shipley, I believe, got most of the touches there. Looking at our defense, I was fairly impressed with it. I think we had I want to say 7 sacks on one, four, 5, 6, 7. We got 7 sacks on the day, which was fairly impressive. It looks like our defense is starting to buy into this Vic Fangio defense, which obviously takes a couple of weeks to start heating up. But once it does, the sacks are going to keep on coming here. Nakobe Dean, 2 sacks. He absolutely crushed Daniel Jones anytime that he got into the backfield. Jalen Carter, 2 sacks. Let's see. Nolan Smith had a sack. That was fairly impressive. I was happy to see that. Bryce Huff finally shows up, and in the stadium that he used to play in at MetLife, he finally gets a sack. Hopefully, that's a sign of more things to come. Agent Zero has been really quiet, but with this, I hope he starts to heat up. Hopefully, Fangio's defense he starts to buy in more, and they start to curtail it more to what he's good at. Josh Sweat had a good sack, and Jalix Hunt had a sack. I don't even remember Jalix Hunt getting a sack. Once we hit the fourth quarter, I kind of stopped watching anyway, but I'm guessing that came against Drew Lock, who the Giants threw in. Quinyon Mitchell almost had another interception. He's almost had an interception in every single game. Like, they've gone through his fingers, or somebody's hit him as he's about to catch it, or he just plays it wrong. But he's almost had a pick in every single game so far. So hopefully that comes soon. I'm not sure if it's going to come against Joe Burrow next week, because he's quite safe when it comes to delivering the ball, but we're going to have to see. Sidney Brown came back. That's promising. But yeah, this game was more about the Eagles' dominance compared to the Giants' failure, which Daniel Jones went 14 for 21, 99 yards, no touchdowns, but no interceptions. I don't believe he fumbled either, so it's not like we really got any turnovers, but we just were able to stop this Giants' offense a lot. Rushing, Tyrone Tracy Jr. led the Giants in rushing for 6 carries and 23 yards. Danny Dimes, 5 carries for 20 yards, and Devin Singletary, 5 carries for 18 yards. Receiving, we were able to hold Malik Nabers, which really shut down their offense. Malik Nabers had 4 receptions for 41 yards. He didn't look that great. I'm surprised he even had as many yards as he did. Looking at their defense, let's see, they had 2, 4, 5. I think they had 5 sacks, which is way too much for this Eagles offensive line. but still they were able to get through. And they were able to affect Jalen Hurts a little bit, but he seemed unshaken by this Giants pressure. They love to dial up the pressure, especially against Jalen Hurts. But yeah, overall, this was definitely a good Eagles win. Now, I would like to see this momentum continue into the next few games as our schedule gets easier. Speaking of, looking at the rest of our schedule here, next few games are definitely winnable. Bengals is going to be more difficult than people think. Jaguars, which I am going to, I'm going to be at the link for this game, uh, looks fairly promising. So, assuming that we beat the Bengals, 2-0. The Cowboys have looked awful at home, so I assume that we beat them. If we're home against Washington, I can see us beating them, but if we're in Washington, I would assume that we lose. The next few weeks coming up, and even until the end of the season, don't look overly challenging if we can just start stacking the wins and continue this momentum forward. We don't have to be the best team, that's not what I'm asking for. But we just have to contend, especially with the Commanders being in our division. We need to contend and continue to build momentum and keep gathering wins. It's alright if we drop one or two, but let's see if we can keep building on top of this, especially throughout our schedule. So, looking at a recap of this past weekend's games, we go to Thursday Night Football, where the Broncos decimate the Saints at home, 33-10. Broncos, looking at the stats here, Bo Nix went 16 for 26, 164 yards, no touchdowns, but no interceptions. He also had 10 carries for 75 yards. So he also was able to attack this Saints D on the ground. Javonte Williams was their had a fairly good game with 14 carries for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns. Receiving, I don't think they had anybody over 50 yards. Yeah, top receiver was Troy Franklin, 5 receptions for 50 yards. Um, Bo Nix seemed to spread the ball out a lot. Realistically, I think their best player of the day was probably Javonte Williams on offense, who also had 3 receptions on offense for 23 yards, but no touchdowns. Let's see. I don't believe that this defense turned Spencer Rattler over. Yeah, it doesn't seem like they had any picks on defense. Sacks, it looks like they were able to hit him a few times. It looked around, I want to say like 5.5 or 6 sacks on for this Broncos defense, which is promising. But I feel like this game was more about the how inept the Saints offense was. Although Spencer Rattler went 25 for 35, 172 yards, no touchdowns and no interceptions. Who's Jake Haener? I guess they threw in a backup quarterback near the end of the game who went 3 for 4, 38 yards and a touchdown, which I guess that's a little bit upsetting for Saints fans if your only touchdown came off the backup quarterback. I believe Spencer Rattler turned over the ball with 2 fumbles, though, I believe. I believe that Spencer Rattler fumbled the ball twice, which led to 2 scooping scores for the Broncos D. So maybe the Broncos D were able to shut them down pretty well. Receiving, their top receiver was Cedric Wilson Jr. with 6 receptions for 58 yards and a touchdown. And rushing, nothing special. Alvin Kamara got shut down. He had 7 carries for 10 yards, no touchdown. That's a little bit upsetting. Kendre Miller was their top rusher in yards with 6 carries, 36 yards. So yeah, it was just really ineptitude on the Saints' part instead of a good Broncos win, in my opinion. Though the defense played pretty well and up to snuff, so I gotta give the flowers to where they're due. Looking at the next game, we got our final London game. We had the Pats versus the Jaguars. Jaguars beat the Patriots 32-16. Looking at how the Jaguars did, Trevor Lawrence went 15 for 20, 193 yards, a touchdown with no interceptions. Where they did a lot of their damage, though, was on the ground. Their top running back with Travis Etienne being out, their top running back, Tank Bigsby, 26 carries, 118 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Receiving, Trevor spread the ball out a lot with his top 2 receivers being Brian Thomas Jr. and Evan Ingram, both receiving 5 receptions, but obviously Brian Thompson Jr. had that long, deep pass. I believe it was a post route. He got it right in between the 2 safeties. He ended up having 89 yards on the day and 1 touchdown. Defense, I don't believe turned or picked off Drake May at all. I don't believe they really got any pressure. Well, they might have gotten some pressure, but they got, I think, 2 sacks on the day, which is a little bit disappointing for this Jackson defense that has to step up. I think the Jaguars are starting to figure out their formula that they have to take the ball out of Trevor's hand as a lot more and put it in the running game. Tank Bigsby had a big game. Obviously, I don't expect him to have a 26 carry game again, but that's fairly impressive from, I believe he's a rookie running back too, or at least I've never heard of him before this season. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how the Jaguars continue to try to find success. Drake May went, for the Patriots, Drake May went 26 for 37. 276 yards and 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Fairly impressive from the rookie. He had to do a lot more because his running game really wasn't there, with Ramondre Stevenson having 7 carries for 18 yards. Antonio Gibson went down early in the game with after having 3 carries for 4 yards. Drake May had 3 carries for 18 yards himself. I believe those were him stepping up in the pocket and just the center of the line parting the Red Sea in front of him, allowing him to take off. Seems like he spread the ball out a lot to his receivers, with Hunter Henry, his tight end, being his top target, having 8 receptions and 92 yards. Jamalki Hasty had 5 receptions for 49 yards and a touchdown. KJ Osborne had the other touchdown through receiving. Fairly good day. I feel like this was more of a Jaguars win than a Patriots loss, but overall it was a good game. Goodbye, London. We'll see you guys next year. The Germany game, I know, is coming up at some point later this season, maybe in a couple weeks, but we're just going to have to see about that. After the Germany game, I believe we're done with international games until next year, which will kind of be nice. Looking at the next game, we have Lions-Vikings, one of the biggest games of the weekend. The Lions go into Minnesota and beat the Vikings 31-29 off of a game-winning field goal by, I believe he's a rookie too, Jake Bates. Yeah, Jake Bates, good job, pal. You made a chip shot field goal and then had your defense lock down the explosive Vikings offense in a Hail Mary situation. Jared Goff, very impressive. Went 22 for 25, 280 yards and 2 touchdowns. A weird stat that I found, and I believe most people have probably seen it at this point, is that the Lions have more offensive touchdowns than incompletions over the past 3 or 4 games, which is insane. Jared Goff is playing at a very high level right now, and it helps that his running game is helping him out, with Jahmyr Gibbs having 15 carries for 116 yards and 2 touchdowns, whereas David Montgomery only had 9 carries for 31 touchdowns. Still a fairly good day especially for Jahmyr Gibbs in the rushing department. Receiving, Amon-Ra St. Brown stepped up, 8 receptions for 112 yards and a touchdown. Jahmyr Gibbs was actually the second leading receiver with 4 receptions for 44 yards. Jameson Williams, really quiet day, only 1 reception for -4 yards, and Sam Laporta has been very disappointing, especially after being very hot last season. Sam Laporta only had 1 reception for 25 yards. I don't think that the defense was able to pick off Sam Darnold once, that coming from safety Brian Branch. But looking at this Saints team, they didn't do horrible. I mean, Sam Darnold went 22 for 27, 259 yards, a touchdown, and an interception, which definitely hurt them, especially it being a one-score game. Aaron Jones on the ground, 14 carries for 93 yards and a touchdown. Sam Darnold was right behind him in rushing with 4 carries for 39 yards. Justin Jefferson had a really big touchdown. I believe it was a fade or a streak route down the field. Justin Jefferson went 7 for 81 and a touchdown. With the rest of the team really being quiet, Jordan Addison only 3 receptions for 66 yards. A fairly good day, but wasn't able to help his team score. Overall, this was a fairly good win by this Lions team, and they continue to prove week in and week out that they're probably one of, if not the best team in the NFL right now. The only other team that you could argue that would probably be the Chiefs, which are the last undefeated team, which we will touch on in a little bit here. But moving on to this next game, this game was really tight at halftime. It was the Bills beating the Titans 34-10. Mason Rudolph was named starter for the Titans, and if you're having Mason Rudolph, so Mason Rudolph went 25 for 40, 215 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. If you're having Mason Rudolph pass 40 times, I highly doubt that that's the key to success. Their top running back, Tony Pollard, had 16 carries for 61 yards and no touchdowns. My bad. So, receiving, Mason Rudolph really spread the ball out, with his top receiver being Chizum Okonkwo, having 4 receptions for 50 yards, no touchdowns. Tyler Boyd would be the next closest with he had more receptions. He had 5 receptions for 43 yards. And Calvin Ridley has been surprisingly quiet, like he was last year at Jacksonville, having 3 receptions for 42 yards. We'll touch on D-Hop in a little bit. There's some interesting news that came out this morning as I woke up. DeAndre Hopkins had 1 reception for -2 yards, so we'll touch on that in a little bit. Bills just looked fairly efficient, especially in the second half. They ran up the score. Josh Allen went 21 for 33, 323 yards and 2 touchdowns. Surprisingly, their rushing game hasn't really gotten anything going. That's a little bit concerning. They hopefully should find a groove eventually. Their leading rusher was Ray Davis, who had 5 carries for 41 yards and a touchdown. James Cook, 12 carries for 32 yards and a touchdown. I was hoping for James Cook to be a little bit more explosive. Hopefully he finds that as time goes on. Their leading receiver is Keon Coleman, who had 4 receptions for 125 yards, no touchdowns. Whereas Amari Cooper, the new Buffalo Bill, had 4 receptions for 66 yards and a touchdown. Fairly good day for Bills. Obviously, Amari Cooper's debut in Buffalo. There's not really much to say. The Bills need to get that rushing game going. But other than that, fairly impressive win. The Titans, it's time to tank. Hopefully you can get a good player. There's no real good quarterbacks besides maybe Cam Ward and I wouldn't even say Jalen Milroe anymore. Cam Ward probably would be their top option. But we're going to see what happens to the Titans as the season goes on, whether they hold on to that top pick or that number 1 overall pick. Next game, a real snooze fest. You have Colts Dolphins. Colts beat the Dolphins 16-10. Looking at this Colts offense, Anthony Richardson went 10 for 24, 129 yards. He led the team in rushing with 14 carries for 56 yards. I'm not seeing Jonathan Taylor in the rushing stats, so I'm assuming he was out this game. Looking at receiving, Michael Pittman, top receiver with 3 receptions for 63 yards. Adonai Mitchell, 2 receptions for 30 yards, and Alec Pierce right behind him with 2 receptions for 15 yards. This defense didn't get any. Well, no, they got 2 sacks on the Dolphins, which is kind of easy because their offensive line is like Swiss cheese. It looks like Tyler Huntley got either benched or eventually got injured because Tim Boyle came in eventually. Tim Boyle went 8 for 13, whereas Tyler Huntley went 7 for 13. Tyler Huntley had the only passing touchdown on the day. The rushing looked actually fine, with Devon Chain having 15 carries, 77 yards, and Raheem Mostert having 11 carries and 50 yards. Looks like they really split up the carries by the 2 backs in order to keep both of them healthy because they both have history of injury. Jonnu Smith was the top receiver for the Dolphins with 7 receptions, 96 yards, and a touchdown. There's nobody else of note. Tyreek Hill has been so quiet this year, and that doesn't help my prediction that he would be Offensive Player of the Year and break 2,000 yards. So maybe next year. Or I can keep saying this every year, and then it just will never come true. Other than that, quite a snooze fest. Speaking of snooze fest, you have Seahawks Falcons. Just going over this brief. Geno Smith, fairly productive, 18 for 28, 207 yards and 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Rushing, Kenneth Walker was their top rusher with 14 carries for 69 yards and a touchdown. DK Metcalf went insane for 4 receptions, 99 yards and a touchdown. Kenneth Walker also had a receiving touchdown as well with 2 receptions on 24 yards. Looking at this Falcons team, Kirk Cousins had 2 interceptions and a fumble, I believe, to 1 touchdown. He also went 24 for 35, 232 yards. Michael Penix eventually came in, I guess. Went 1 for 1 and 14 yards. Bijan had a really good day, surprisingly. He went 21 carries for 103 yards and a touchdown on the ground, and in the air he had 3 receptions for 40 yards. Kyle Pitts led the team in receiving with 7 receptions for 65 yards, but did not get any passing touchdowns. That would go to Drake London. Their defense could not really pressure Geno that much, which allowed him to deliver the ball to as many receivers, which is a little bit of a problem. Again, another snooze fest. There was a couple very boring ones this week, but yeah. Looking at a fairly exciting game, we have the Packers-Texans. Packers beat the Texans 24-22. Jordan Love went 24 for 33, 220 yards, 3 touchdowns, but unfortunately 2 interceptions, which is a little bit concerning because this Texans defense looked good but not great. Rushing, Josh Jacobs was their leading rusher, and it wasn't even close. Josh Jacobs only had 12 carries for 76 yards, no touchdowns on the ground. He also didn't have any receptions for the air either. Their top receiver was Romeo Doubs, had 8 receptions for 94 yards, but Deontay Wicks, Tucker Kraft, and Josh Jacobs all had 1 touchdown through the air as well. This defense doesn't look like it was able to pressure. No, it got some. They got like 4 sacks. No turnovers, it looks like, for the Packers. Looking at C.J. Stroud, this is a little bit concerning to me, and I'll touch on it in a second. He went 10 for 21, 86 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. Joe Mixon had a big day. He went 25 for 115 or 25 carries for 115 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. Through the air, he had 2 receptions, 9 yards. Obviously, there's no passing touchdown. C.J. Stroud really force-fed Stefon Diggs. He went 5 receptions for 23 yards. This offense was really quiet. Tank Dell had a really quiet day with goose eggs across the board. This is really concerning to me because the Texans were everybody's pick to knock off the Chiefs in the AFC, but honestly, I don't see it, and I didn't see it in the preseason as well. What's a little bit concerning is that quarterbacks have this sophomore slump, and C.J. Stroud is going through it, and we just have to accept that. We can't put that much pressure on the kid, honestly. This is a little bit concerning. Obviously, their division, which I'll touch on the divisions in a little bit here, is not that overly close. They just need to keep beating the bad teams, especially in their own division. But if they start to slip and C.J. Stroud starts to play mediocre, then we might look at a Texans first round exit. I'm not going to predict that. I'll predict the playoffs around probably week 16, week 17 once we get closer. Who's going to get in, what round are they going to get bounced, and who's going to be the Super Bowl winner. But till then, we'll keep an eye on C.J. Stroud, and I'll keep you guys updated. The Bengals struggle to beat the Browns 21-14. We'll get to the Browns in a second here, but Joe Burrow went 15 for 25, 181 yards and 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. On the ground, Chase Brown led the way with 15 carries for 44 yards, no touchdowns. Receiving, Jamar Chase had 5 receptions for 55 yards and a touchdown, and his counterpart, T. Higgins, had 4 receptions for 82 yards and a touchdown. So technically, T. Higgins had the bigger day, but it was a really solid day from this Bengals passing offense. Looking at this is really a mess. Looking at this Browns quarterback room, Deshaun Watson, before he went down with a season-ending Achilles injury, went 15 for 17, 128 yards with no touchdown, no interception. He went down with a season-ending Achilles injury, which is really unfortunate for because I like the player that is Deshaun Watson. The person is a little bit different, but he just was in this funk, and I believe that we might have seen the end of Deshaun, maybe for good. We're going to have to see, and we're going to have to continue to watch that storyline, especially during the offseason. They brought in his backup, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who went 11 for 24, 82 yards and 2 interceptions. He eventually also got knocked out of the game. He eventually got injured. I forget what it was. And then they had to bring in their emergency quarterback, Jameis Winston, who went 5 for 11, 68 yards and a touchdown. On the ground, it was really upsetting for this Browns offense that Nick Chubb is finally back in. He had 11 carries for 22 yards and a touchdown. Passing, their main target was David Njoku. He went 10 receptions for 76 yards and a touchdown. Honestly, it's really just depressing looking at this game because the Bengals, in theory, should have beat the Browns by a lot, and they just didn't. They just couldn't pull away, which has been the story of the Bengals season so far. So once they start facing better teams, it's going to start to become more concerning. Browns, it's time to tank here. We're at the point of the season where we start to decide who's probably going to tank for picks and who's not. There have been rumors that Myles Garrett might be on the trade block and that the Browns have not stopped any possible trade inquiries into Myles Garrett. So we're going to see where that goes. I doubt that they'll trade him, but we're just going to have to wait and see. Maybe they can get some capital back that they lost during Deshaun trade that they could use to move on from this era. I don't believe it's the coaching's fault, but it's just unlucky. Uh, it's just unlucky. I guess fortunes. I guess, or whatever. It's just not. It's just not a good look for either team, in my opinion. Next up, another real snooze fest. Raiders Rams. Rams beat the Raiders 20-15, which is not that impressive. Rams, Matthew Stafford went 14 for 23, 154 yards and an interception. Kyron Williams was their main player of the day, who had 21 carries for 76 yards and 2 touchdowns. And through the air, their top receiver was Tutu Atwell, who had 6 receptions for 51 yards. Looking at this Raider offense, eventually Aiden O'Connell went down with an injury. He'll be out for, I believe it was like a fractured thumb. He might be out for 4 to 6 weeks. So Gardner Minshew's back, and we're riding with Gardner, who went 15 for 34, 154 yards, and 3 interceptions. That ain't going to get the job done. Top receiver, obviously, was Brock Bowers, who had 10 receptions for 93 yards. He's been quietly having a good season, in my opinion, and could be up for offensive. He'll be up for offensive rookie of the year, but they're going to give it to Jaden Daniels or Caleb Williams. Alexander Mattison, 23 carries for 92 yards for the Raiders. Overall, again, a snooze fest, so I figured just blitz through that one, get it over with. Another real snooze fest. I'm not really going to touch on it besides that that Jaden Daniels went down with a rib injury. Commanders beat the Panthers 40-7. Prove that it's not really just Jaden Daniels that makes this team good. It's all the players put together. Unlike what the media has been trying to tell you, Panthers, very depressing. Eventually, Bryce Young came in, and he had -4 passing yards. Rushing, Chuba Hubbard, 17 carries for 52 yards and a touchdown. Other than that, I'm not going to touch this game with a 5-foot pole. Next up, we have Chiefs 49ers. A lot of big injuries coming out of this one for the 49ers and the Chiefs. We'll talk on the acquisition that the Chiefs just made this morning as of recording this. But Mahomes looked, besides when he had that long rush that everybody's talking about, he looked fairly pedestrian. Going for 16 for 27, 154 yards and 2 interceptions. This passing game is looking worse and worse as weeks go by. Travis Kelce had 4 receptions for 17 yards, but Noah Gray was their top receiver, who had 4 receptions for 66 yards. On the ground, Kareem Hunt really carried this team, 22 carries for 78 yards and 2 touchdowns. But yeah, looking at the 49ers, this was more of a 49ers loss. Brock Purdy went 17 for 31, 212 yards and 3 interceptions. Jordan Mason really got shut down on the ground. He went 14 for 54 yards and no touchdowns. And you know it's a problem when Brock Purdy rushes for 2 touchdowns and can't pass for a single one. George Kittle was his top receiver, with Ayuk and Debo both being out, or Ayuk going down early in this game and Debo being out for this game. George Kittle they had to really lean on, who had 6 receptions for 92 yards. Really just upsetting. Both defenses played really well and were able to turn over the opposing quarterback a lot. But yeah, just a really not a great look for either team, and especially the 49ers, who are starting to stockpile some injuries over there. Next up, we have Sunday Night Football, which was interesting. We had the Steelers beating the Jets 37-15. Russell Wilson played fairly well. He did the opposite of what I said he would. He actually didn't turn the ball over. He didn't get pressured that much. and he went 16 for 29, 264 yards and 2 touchdowns. Rushing, Najee Harris did pretty well having 21 carries for 102 yards and a touchdown. Russell Wilson also rushed for a touchdown as well. Receiving, it was a big day for George Pickens, who has been struggling with Justin Fields under center. George Pickens had 5 receptions for 111 yards and a pretty nice touchdown. I remember seeing that. Van Jefferson had their other offensive passing touchdown. And it looks like their next best receiver was Darnell Washington with 4 receptions for 36 yards. This defense turned Rodgers over twice. It was Beanie Bishop Jr., who had 2 interceptions on the day. So it was a fairly good day for this Steelers defense. They were able to shut down Rodgers and this offense. Looking at the Jets' offense, Rodgers went 24 for 39, 276 yards, and touchdown and 2 interceptions. Though I will say that it was not entirely Rodgers' fault, those 2 interceptions. He just couldn't overcome them eventually in the game, which made it hard to win. Breece Hall on the ground really got shut down. He had 12 carries for 38 yards and a touchdown. Through the air, though, he was better with that big run that helped inflate his numbers a bit. He had 6 receptions for 103 yards. Garrett Wilson, even though his stats say it was a good day, it was a really bad day for him. He had 5 receptions for 61 yards, and he caused both of Rodgers' interceptions. Davante Adams, a little bit more of a quieter day. He had 3 receptions for 30 yards. I'm expecting for things for the Jets to click, but it's panic time now for the Jets. The Steelers are a playoff team, and if you can't beat them, and you can't string together some wins here against some bad teams, this isn't the season, and we might even see Rodgers retire in the offseason with how interesting this team has looked, especially over the past few games. Moving on to one of 2 Monday Night Footballs, we had the Ravens beating the Bucks 41-31. Ravens, the offense looked fairly solid with Lamar being 17 for 22, 281 yards and 5 passing touchdowns through the air, and on the ground he had 9 carries for 52 yards. Derrick Henry, even though Lamar was the player of the game, like he had the best stats, Derrick Henry also had an amazing night as well. He went 15 for 169, no rushing touchdowns. I believe, did he have a receiving? He had 1 receiving touchdown. He had 1 reception for 13 yards and a touchdown. Receiving looked fairly good with Rashad Bateman being their top receiver with 4 receptions, 121 yards, and a touchdown. Justice Hill, another complimentary running back to Derrick Henry, was more used in the passing than he was in the rushing. He had 3 receptions for 44 yards and a touchdown. Mark Andrews had 2 touchdowns on the night, so it was nice to see him back. Zay Flowers had a really quiet night, 1 reception for 11 yards. That's a little bit concerning, but I just hope that we're going to see him start to pick up his game a little bit and see Lamar hit him more in stride. Marlon Humphrey had 2 interceptions on the day. And who had the other? Was it just 2? I think it was just 2. Yeah, there's just 2 interceptions on the day for this Ravens defense, but they turned into points, so I don't think they can really complain. Looking at this Bucks offense, it's just weird, I guess. Their top 2 receivers are now down with injury, 1 out for several weeks and 1 out for the rest of the season. Baker Mayfield went 31 for 45, 370 yards, 3 touchdowns, and again, another game where he has 2 or more interceptions on the day, which is a little bit concerning, but I guess he's just in a little bit of a funk. Hopefully we could see him snap out of it. Rachaad White had 10 carries for 40 yards. Bucky Irving had 9 carries for 23 yards. And Baker Mayfield rushed had a couple of rushing yards himself, having 5 carries for 22 yards. Sean Tucker also came out of nowhere, 5 carries for 29 yards. Receiving, Baker mainly had to hit Cade Otton, who had 8 receptions for 100 yards, and Rachaad White had 6 receptions for 71 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was arguably more impactful in the passing game. Mike Evans, before he went down with a hamstring injury, had 1 reception for 25 yards and a touchdown. This defense was not able to stop Lamar or turn Lamar over or contain Lamar or Derrick Henry now, which is becoming more of a problem. So that's going to be interesting to see what the Bucs do to try to step up their defense and especially limit turnovers on offense. Baker's going to have to step it up here because they're starting to look shaky now, but luckily their division is a little bit more weaker, so they can lose a couple of games like this. Chargers, Cardinals. Cardinals just barely beat the Chargers 17-15. Cardinals on offense, Kyler Murray went 14 for 26, 145 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. On the ground, Kyler Murray had 6 carries for 64 yards and a touchdown. James Conner, their top running back, had 19 carries for 101 yards. And receiving, Trey McBride was their top receiver with 5 receptions for 51 yards. Greg Dortch had 1 reception for 5 yards and 1 touchdown. He had their only passing touchdown. I don't believe the defense was able to. They got to Justin Herbert once and weren't able to turn him over at all. I don't know why James Conner's on defense. Oh, that's interesting. All right. Anyway, looking at this Chargers offense, Justin Herbert went 27 yards for 27 completions for 39 attempts, 349 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. So he really didn't help his team in that category. I'm guessing all 15 points came from kicking. Let's see. Yep, 5 field goals. So there you have it. Rushing, they really couldn't get anything going. J.K. Dobbins, their top running back, had 14 carries for 40 yards, no touchdowns. Receiving, Will Dissly was their top receiver, having 8 receptions for 81 yards, with Joshua Palmer and Ladd McConkey following right behind him with 4 receptions and 5 receptions, respectively. Again, a really nothing burger of a game to end this week's recap on, but I'm hoping that next weekend we'll have a few more exciting games that we can really get into the implications to. Some quick notes before we move on here. As I mentioned earlier, this morning it was announced that DeAndre Hopkins was traded to the Chiefs for a 5th-rounder. I'm assuming that's probably a conditional that can turn into a 4th-rounder for the Titans. I knew the Titans were most likely going to be sellers, especially at the trade deadline, especially looking at their record. This is going to help the Chiefs' offense a lot, but I don't see how. Mahomes is turning over this ball and making games close. He has eight interceptions on the year to 6 touchdowns, passing touchdowns. So it will help, but it's not going to help that much. It's going to have to come from Patty Mahomes, just trying to not turn over the ball as much. The injury bug has hit the NFL pretty hard, especially 2 teams, the 49ers and the Buccaneers. Brandon Ayuk is out for the season, I believe, with an ACL, MCL tear. Deebo Samuel was out and will continue to be out with pneumonia. He just got released from the hospital either yesterday or today. I forget which one it was. Chris Godwin is going to be out for the rest of the season with an ankle injury after getting season-ending surgery, that is. Mike Evans will be out until at least week 12 with a hamstring strain, and Deshaun Watson is out for the season with an Achilles tear. The media has been, keeping on the subject of the Browns, the media has been fairly mad at Browns fans cheering when Deshaun was being carted off the field. And although I don't entirely disagree with their stance, again, these are football fans. And if you're not going to produce, they're probably not going to be the most cheery of people. Jerry Jones admitted on a radio show that the Cowboys will not be buying or selling at the trade deadline and that they're very confident in their team. I feel like this is going to be a big mistake for the Cowboys down the line, but I guess we're going to see how this pays off, sitting at 3-3. And one of the biggest sellers, it turns out, might be the Rams, with them being in serious trade talks with the Vikings to trade Matthew Stafford, and Cooper Kupp possibly being on the trade block as well. Well, with all that quick information out of the way, let's look at some of the standings. The Bills sit atop the AFC East pretty. The Bills are 5-2, with the next closest team being 2-4, that being the Dolphins, the Jets being 2-5, and the Patriots being 1-6. Chiefs sit atop the AFC West at 6-0. Broncos are a little bit behind them at 4-3. Chargers now dropped to 3-3 in third place, and Raiders are 2-5. Let's see. Atop the AFC North sit the Ravens and Steelers, both still tied for first. That first division game is going to be very interesting between the two teams. The Bengals are on third at 3-4, and the Browns are at 1-6. The Texans, although looking kind of shaky, sit atop the AFC South at 5-2. The Colts are right behind them at 4-3, and the next closest team, the Jaguars, at 2-5, with the Titans rounding us out at 1-5. Sitting atop the AFC East would be the Commanders at 5-2, Eagles right behind them at 4-2, Cowboys at 3-3, and Giants at 2-5. The Seahawks are sitting atop the NFC West at 4-3. Cardinals right behind them at 3-4. Same with the 49ers at 3-4. And at the bottom we have the Rams at 2-4. Looking at this NFC North, again, it's a close race between all the teams, and the Packers keep staying in it. Lions are 5-1. Vikings are 5-1. Both are tied for first. Packers are in third at 5-2, and the Bears are 4-2, rounding us out at the bottom there. Finally, the last and probably weakest division is the NFC South. The Falcons and Bucks are tied at first at 4-3, with the Saints coming in at third, losing 5 straight, ending up being 2-5, and the Panthers at the very bottom being 1-6. All right, so let's get into this weekend's games. I know you want them. I know you want my opinions. Last weekend I went 11-4, and my season overall is 69-38. It seems that on Thursday Night Football we have the Vikings-Rams. Yeah, Rams just don't look good right now, in my opinion. And if they're sellers, I don't think a lot of the team is buying into the culture. And with the Vikings coming off of a bad or a close loss, I think the Vikings bounce back and beat the Rams. Let's say probably 31-10. Next up we have Browns-Ravens. Give me Ravens all day. Browns obviously losing Deshaun and starting Jameis Winston. And although I do believe in Jameis Winston and that he could be a solid quarterback, he's not enough to beat this Ravens team that's continuing to build momentum as they go forward. So give me the Ravens winning this probably 38-7. Next up, we have the Lions Titans. Give me Lions probably beating the Titans 42-13. Next up, we have Cardinals Dolphins, and although this might be an interesting game, still give me the Cardinals, especially after last week's win. They looked fairly explosive at times. Obviously, at times they looked a little bit stale and they stalled, but I believe against this really banged up Dolphins team, which I believe does have Tua coming back, I still don't think it will make a difference, so give me the Cardinals winning this. Probably a close game. Give me the Cardinals winning this 17-13. Next up, we have Patriots. Give me the Jets in a bounce back win. Probably a Devontae Adams touchdown and a Garrett Wilson touchdown is in order for this Jets offense to climb up to 3-5. So give me the Jets winning this probably 28-10. Next up, we have the Falcons Bucks. Give me the Bucks, although both teams look very shaky in both their losses this past weekend. I have more faith in Baker than I do Kirk right now, especially after he turned over the ball 3 times last week. So give me the Bucks, although I think it's going to be a close battle. I think it's going to end up being 28-24. We have Packers Jaguars. Give me the Packers probably beating the Jaguars 41-17. We have Colts Texans. It's in Houston. If it was at Indianapolis, I might have given the Colts the edge, but give me Houston winning this. Probably a really close game. Give me Houston in 21-17. We have Bengals Eagles. Give me the Eagles going into Cincinnati and beating this decent Bengals team. Give me the Eagles probably 31-24. Next up, we have Chargers Saints. Give me the Chargers. They're probably going to want to bounce back, especially after last week's loss. So give me the Chargers, hopefully with a touchdown this week. But give me the Chargers 24-10. Next up, we have Bills Seahawks. Give me the Bills all day. Although the Seahawks looked fairly good and fairly explosive, give me the Bills winning this. Give me the Bills. Give me the Bills 28-17. We have Bears Commanders. Give me the Bears. I have a weird feeling, especially with Jaden Daniels being out. It could make a sizable difference. I know it didn't look like it, but there were still probably some miscues that probably need to be worked out on this Washington offense. So give me Bears winning this in a tight game, 20-17. Panthers Broncos. Give me Broncos winning this probably 28-10. Bo Nix has a very impressive game and starts to look like a offensive Rookie of the Year candidate. Chiefs Raiders, especially after all the Kermit the Frog puppet stuff over the offseason. Give me the Chiefs probably giving this Raiders team an ass whooping, an old style one as well. Give me Chiefs, probably not as high scoring as some may think, but give me the Chiefs 24-10. We have Cowboys 49ers. Give me the 49ers. Even though Brock Purdy turned over the ball 3 times, I still have more faith in the 49ers to beat this Cowboys team than I do have in the Cowboys to beat the 49ers. Though, It will be difficult. It will probably come down to coaching, and I feel more impressed and more confident in the 49ers. So give me 49ers and another close game, probably 31-24. Finally, we have Steelers-Giants. Give me the Steelers all day. Steelers will probably run all over, and Russ will start to uh, look like a good quarterback again. So give me Steelers 38-10. All right, so that will do it for this week's picks. I want to thank you all for stopping by our podcast again, and I'll talk to you guys next week. With all that being said, remember, have a good day and go Birds.